The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail outside Hangtown, California, in the summer of 1872. And Gabriel Strand thought he had seen everything the frontier could throw at him, until he spotted the girl stumbling through the sagebrush with blood on her torn dress and terror still lingering in her dark eyes. He pulled his horse to a halt, dust swirling around the animal's legs as he took in the scene before him. The girl could not have been more than 20, her Apache heritage evident in her high cheekbones and the traditional beadwork that still clung to what remained of her clothing. She swayed on her feet, clearly exhausted beyond measure, and when her eyes met his, Gabriel saw a mix of fear and desperate hope that made his chest tighten. "Easy now," he said softly, dismounting slowly so as not to startle her. He kept his hands visible, his movements deliberate. "I am not going to hurt you." She watched him with the wariness of a wild creature, her body tense to flee despite her obvious exhaustion. Gabriel noticed the scrapes on her feet, the way her lips were cracked from thirst, and the trembling in her legs that suggested she had been walking for far too long without rest or water. He reached for his canteen, uncorking it and holding it out to her. "Water," he said simply, gesturing to his mouth to make his meaning clear. For a long moment she simply stared at him, her breathing shallow and quick. Then, as if her body made the decision before her mind could protest, she lunged forward and grabbed the canteen. She drank deeply, water spilling down her chin in her desperation, and Gabriel had to gently pull it away before she made herself sick. "Slow," he cautioned. "You will make yourself ill." When she looked up at him again, he saw tears mixing with the dust on her cheeks. She said something in Apache, her voice hoarse and broken, and though Gabriel did not understand all the words, he understood the emotion behind them. This girl had been through something terrible. He looked around at the empty landscape, seeing no signs of a camp or other people. Whatever had happened to her, she was alone now, and the sun would not show mercy to anyone caught out here without shelter or supplies. "My ranch is not far," Gabriel said, pointing toward the west where his land lay. "You can rest there, get cleaned up. We will figure out what happened and what to do next." She did not understand his words, but when he gestured toward his horse and then to the direction of his home, comprehension flickered across her face. She hesitated, clearly weighing her options, and Gabriel could see the moment she decided to trust him. It was a small thing, just a slight relaxation in her shoulders, but it spoke volumes about her desperation. Gabriel helped her onto his horse, noting how light she felt, how fragile despite the strength he could sense beneath her exhaustion. He swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance, and urged the animal into a steady walk. The girl swayed in the saddle, and after a moment, her head drooped back against his shoulder. She had fallen into the sleep of the utterly exhausted. The ride to his ranch took the better part of an hour, and Gabriel spent that time acutely aware of the young woman resting against him. He had been alone on his ranch for 3 years now, ever since he had saved enough from his time working cattle drives to buy his own piece of land. It was modest, just a small house and a barn with enough grazing land for a decent herd, but it was his. He had grown accustomed to the solitude, had even come to prefer it after the chaos and violence he had seen during the war and in the rough towns where he had worked. But now, with this stranger in his arms, he felt something shift inside him, some long, dormant protective instinct roaring to life. When they reached his property, Gabriel carefully dismounted and then eased the girl down from the horse. She woke with a start, fear flashing across her face before she seemed to remember where she was and who he was. He led her toward the house, a simple wooden structure he had built himself, and pushed open the door. Inside, everything was neat but sparse. A table with 2 chairs, a stove, a bed in the corner and shelves holding his few possessions. The girl stood in the doorway, taking it all in with wide eyes. Gabriel gestured to the bed. "You should rest," he said, even though he knew she could not understand most of his words. He mimed sleeping, his head on his hands, and she nodded slowly. But before she would rest, she pointed to herself and then made washing motions. Gabriel understood immediately. She wanted to clean herself, to wash away the dirt and blood and whatever horrors she had endured. He led her outside to the pump, working the handle until cool water flowed freely. He brought her a clean shirt of his, some soap and a towel, then retreated back inside to give her privacy. Through the window, he could see her washing her face and arms, scrubbing at the dried blood until it ran clear. She stripped off the torn remnants of her dress without shame, standing in just a thin undergarment as she washed herself as best she could. Gabriel looked away, giving her what privacy he could while still keeping watch to ensure no danger approached. When she came back inside wearing his shirt, which hung nearly to her knees, she looked younger and more vulnerable than before. Her long black hair hung wet down her back, and she wrapped her arms around herself, as if suddenly aware of her state of undress. Gabriel heated water on the stove and made a simple stew from the supplies he had on hand. The girl watched him work with curious eyes, and when he placed a bowl in front of her, she ate with the same desperation with which she had drunk earlier. He had to stop her again, worried she would make herself sick. "Slow," he repeated, and this time she seemed to understand, nodding and forcing herself to take smaller bites. When they had both eaten, Gabriel pointed to the bed again. The girl hesitated, looking between him and the single sleeping place. Gabriel shook his head and pointed to himself, then to the floor. He would sleep on the ground. The bed was hers. Relief flooded her face, and she nodded gratefully. She walked to the bed and climbed in, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Within moments, she was asleep again, her breathing deep and even. Gabriel sat at his table, watching her sleep as the sun set outside his window. He had so many questions. Where had she come from? What had happened to her? Did she have family looking for her? But all of those questions would have to wait. For now, she needed rest and safety, and those were things he could provide. That night, Gabriel lay on the floor with a thin blanket, his mind racing. He had taken in a stranger, an Apache woman, in a time when tensions between the settlers and the native peoples were high. Some of the men in Hangtown would not look kindly on his choice. But Gabriel had never been one to care overmuch about the opinions of others, and something about the girl pulled at him in a way he could not explain. Maybe it was the vulnerability in her eyes, or the courage it had taken for her to trust him. Whatever it was, he knew he had made the right choice. The next morning, Gabriel woke to find the girl already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed and watching him with cautious eyes. He rose slowly, not wanting to startle her, and went about his morning routine. He built up the fire in the stove, put coffee on to brew, and started making breakfast. The girl rose and came to stand near him, watching what he was doing. When he cracked eggs into a pan, she pointed to them and said something in Apache. He wished desperately that he could understand her, could communicate beyond these simple gestures and expressions. After they ate, Gabriel tried to figure out what to do next. He pointed to her and raised his eyebrows in question, trying to ask her name. She seemed to understand, placing her hand on her chest and saying, "Halona." "Halona," Gabriel repeated, testing the word on his tongue. It sounded beautiful, melodic. He pointed to himself. "Gabriel." She tried the name, her accent making it sound exotic and different. "Gabriel." He smiled and nodded. It was a start. Over the next few days, they developed a tentative routine. Gabriel would do his work around the ranch, tending to his small herd of cattle, mending fences, and completing the endless tasks that came with running his own place. Halona stayed close to the house at first, clearly still recovering from whatever ordeal she had been through. But Gabriel noticed her watching him work, and slowly she began to help. She proved to be remarkably capable. She knew how to tend animals, how to prepare food with minimal ingredients, how to mend and sew. Gabriel found clothes in town that would fit her better, a simple dress and boots, and when she put them on, he was struck by how beautiful she was. Not just her physical beauty, though that was undeniable, but something in the way she carried herself, the strength that shone through despite what she had endured. They began to communicate more effectively, a combination of gestures, simple words in each other's languages, and an intuitive understanding that seemed to grow between them. Gabriel learned that Halona's village had been attacked by bandits who were not particular about whether their victims were Apache, Mexican, or white settlers. They had wanted supplies and had been willing to kill for them. Halona had escaped into the desert, running blindly until she could run no more. When she told him this, tears streaming down her face, Gabriel felt rage build in his chest. He pulled her into his arms without thinking, offering comfort in the only way he knew how. She stiffened at first, unused to such closeness, but then she relaxed and wept against his shoulder. He held her as the sun set, murmuring soft words he hoped were soothing even if she could not understand them all. As the weeks passed, Gabriel found himself thinking about Halona constantly. When he was working in the fields, he would look toward the house and feel a warmth spread through his chest at the sight of her hanging laundry, or tending the small garden she had started. When they sat together in the evenings, teaching each other words in their respective languages, he found himself mesmerized by the way the firelight played across her features. Halona seemed to feel it too, this growing connection between them. She would catch his eye and smile, a shy, secret smile that made his heart race. She started touching him more, casual brushes of her hand against his arm, sitting closer to him than was strictly necessary. Gabriel was careful not to push, not to take advantage of her vulnerable position, but he could not deny what he was feeling. One evening, about 2 months after he had found her, they were sitting outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Halona had been practicing English, and she turned to him with a serious expression. "Gabriel," she said carefully, "why you help me?" He considered the question, trying to find words that would convey the truth. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said slowly. "Because no one should be left alone and afraid." She nodded, processing his words. "You are good man," she said, and the simple statement filled him with more pride than any praise he had ever received. "You are a strong woman," he replied. "You survived something terrible. That takes courage." Halona looked down at her hands. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Still afraid sometimes." Gabriel reached out and gently took her hand, marveling at how small it felt in his. "Being afraid does not mean you are not brave," he said. "Bravery is being afraid and doing what you must anyway." She looked up at him, her dark eyes shining in the fading light, and Gabriel felt something shift between them. The air seemed charged, heavy with unspoken feelings. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it more than he had wanted anything in a long time, but he held back. He needed to be sure she wanted it too, that she was not just grateful or feeling obligated. But Halona made the decision for him. She leaned forward slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted, and pressed her lips to his. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, and Gabriel felt his whole world reorient around this moment. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Halona smiled. "I want this," she said in careful English. "Want you." "I want you too," Gabriel replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Have wanted you for weeks now." They sat there as darkness fell, hands entwined, and Gabriel felt a peace settle over him that he had never known before. This woman, who had come into his life so unexpectedly, had become essential to him. He could not imagine his days without her now, could not imagine this house without her presence filling it. But their peace was not to last long undisturbed. The next time Gabriel rode into Hangtown for supplies, he could feel the stares and hear the whispers. Word had spread that he had an Apache woman living with him, and not everyone was pleased about it. A man named Thomas Crane, who owned a larger ranch to the north, stopped Gabriel on the street. "Heard you have got yourself a little Indian pet," Crane said, his lip curling in distaste. "That true?" Gabriel felt anger flash through him, but he kept his voice level. "I have a guest staying with me," he said carefully. "A woman who needed help." "A woman," Crane repeated mockingly. "That what you are calling her? Most of us would use a different word." Gabriel took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists. "You will speak respectfully," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "or we are going to have a problem." Crane held up his hands in mock surrender. "Easy now, Strand. Just saying what everyone else is thinking. You know there are folks who would not take kindly to a white man keeping an Apache woman. Might cause trouble for you." "I can handle trouble," Gabriel said flatly. He gathered his supplies and left, his jaw tight with barely suppressed rage. When he got home, Halona took one look at his face and came to him immediately. "What happened?" she asked, concern clear in her eyes. Gabriel did not want to burden her with the ugliness of the town's prejudice, but he also would not lie to her. "Some people in town are not happy that you are here," he said carefully. Halona's face fell and she looked down. "I should go," she said quietly. "Not want trouble for you." "No," Gabriel said fiercely, taking her shoulders in his hands. "No, you are not going anywhere. This is your home now if you want it to be. I do not care what anyone in town thinks." "But they could hurt you," Halona protested. "Because of me." "Let them try," Gabriel said. "Halona, He paused, suddenly nervous. They had not spoken of the future, had not defined what was growing between them. But standing there, looking into her eyes, he knew he had to say it. "I love you. I know it has not been long, but I love you. I do not want you to leave. I want you to stay here with me as my wife if you will have me." Halona's eyes widened, filling with tears. "You want marry me?" she whispered. "Yes," Gabriel said firmly. "I want to marry you, want to build a life with you. I know it will not be easy, that some people will have something to say about it, but I do not care. You are what I want." Halona threw her arms around his neck, holding him tight. "I love you too," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Want to be your wife, want stay with you forever." Gabriel held her close, relief and joy flooding through him. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, and he silently vowed that he would do whatever it took to protect her and the life they were building together. Finding someone to marry them proved more difficult than Gabriel had anticipated. The preacher in Hangtown refused, citing concerns about the mixing of races and the supposed heathen nature of Halona's people. Gabriel had to ride to 2 other towns before he found a minister who would perform the ceremony, an older man who had seen enough of the world to know that love was rare and precious no matter where it came from. The ceremony was simple, just the 2 of them and the minister and his wife as witnesses. Halona wore a new dress that Gabriel had bought for her, simple white cotton that made her skin glow. Gabriel wore his best suit, the one he had bought years ago for special occasions and rarely had cause to wear. When they spoke their vows, Halona's English was careful but clear, and Gabriel felt his throat tighten with emotion as she promised to love and honor him for the rest of her life. They rode back to the ranch as husband and wife, and that night, Gabriel made love to her with a tenderness and reverence that left them both breathless. Halona was inexperienced but eager, and Gabriel took his time showing her the ways of physical love, paying attention to her responses and learning what brought her pleasure. When they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Gabriel felt more complete than he had ever felt in his life. The next few months were the happiest Gabriel had ever known. He and Halona worked side by side during the days, expanding the ranch and improving the land. Halona proved to have a natural skill with animals, and under her care, their herd grew healthier and stronger. She also brought knowledge of plants and herbs that could be used for medicine and cooking, skills she had learned from her mother and the other women of her tribe. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their future. Gabriel told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents to illness when he was young, about the war and the violence he had seen. Halona told him about life in her village, about the traditions and customs of her people, about her family who she had lost to the bandits' attack. They also faced challenges. Some of the neighboring ranchers refused to do business with Gabriel because of his Apache wife. There were a few incidents where people threw things at them when they went to town, shouting slurs and insults. Gabriel wanted to fight back to make them pay for their cruelty, but Halona would always calm him down. "They do not understand," she would say. "They are afraid of what is different. Fighting make it worse." Gabriel knew she was right, but it still burned him to see her treated with such disrespect. He started doing most of the trips to town alone, not wanting to subject her to the ugliness of people's prejudice. But Halona refused to be hidden away. "I am your wife," she said firmly when he suggested she stay home. "I go with you. Show them I'm not ashamed. You're not ashamed." So they faced it together, holding their heads high and refusing to be cowed by the hatred of others. Slowly, very slowly, a few people began to come around. The general store owner, a kind, older woman named Mrs. Fletcher, started greeting Halona warmly and even invited her to tea one afternoon. The blacksmith, a gruff man named Joe, began nodding to them when they passed and did good work on their horses without trying to overcharge them as some others had. It was not much, but it was something, and Gabriel took hope from these small kindnesses. In the spring of 1873, Halona told Gabriel that she was pregnant. She said it shyly, watching his face carefully as if afraid of his reaction. Gabriel stared at her for a moment, trying to process the information, and then let out a whoop of joy that startled the chickens in the yard. He picked Halona up and spun her around, both of them laughing with delight. "We are having a baby," he said wonderingly, setting her down gently. "We are going to be parents." Halona smiled, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "You are happy?" she asked. "Happy," Gabriel repeated. "I am more than happy. I am. I do not even have words for what I am feeling right now." They spent the evening making plans, talking about how they would need to add on to the house, what they would need for the baby. Gabriel felt a fierce protectiveness well up inside him. This child, his and Halona's, would be raised knowing it was loved and wanted. It would grow up strong and free, belonging to both worlds and beholden to neither. But Gabriel also worried. He knew the world would not be kind to a child with Apache and white parentage. The child would face prejudice from both sides, would be called names and made to feel like it did not belong anywhere. He shared these concerns with Halona one night as they lay in bed. "I am afraid for our child," he admitted. "Afraid of what people will say, how they will treat our baby." Halona was quiet for a moment, her hand rubbing gentle circles on her growing belly. "The world is hard," she finally said, "but we teach our child to be strong. Teach about both peoples, both ways. Our child will be special, will understand things others do not. Will make the world better maybe." Gabriel marveled at her wisdom and her strength. She had been through so much, had lost everything, and yet she still had hope for the future. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You are an amazing woman, Halona Strand," he said. "Our child is lucky to have you as a mother." "Our child lucky to have you as father," she replied, snuggling against him. As Halona's pregnancy progressed, Gabriel became even more protective. He insisted she rest more, took on extra chores so she would not have to strain herself. Halona tolerated his hovering for a while, but eventually she had to put her foot down. "Gabriel, I am pregnant, not sick," she said with exasperation when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I can still work. Need to work. Make me feel good." Gabriel relented, though he still watched her like a hawk and would not let her do anything too strenuous. He knew he was probably being overbearing, but he could not help himself. Halona and their unborn child were the most precious things in his world, and the thought of anything happening to them made his blood run cold. In late summer, on a day when the heat was oppressive and the sky a cloudless blue, a group of Apache men appeared on the horizon. Gabriel saw them first, and his heart started racing. Were they here for Halona? Were they part of a raiding party? He grabbed his rifle and positioned himself between the approaching group and the house where Halona was resting. But as the men drew closer, he saw that they were not armed for war. They carried no weapons except for knives at their belts, and their body language spoke of caution rather than aggression. One of them, an older man with streaks of gray in his long hair, raised his hand in a gesture of peace. Halona must have heard the commotion because she came out of the house, her hand shading her eyes as she looked at the approaching riders. Suddenly, she let out a cry and ran forward, ignoring Gabriel's shout of alarm. The older man dismounted and caught her as she threw herself at him, words tumbling out of her in rapid Apache that Gabriel could not follow. The man held her, his weathered face showing a mix of relief and joy, and Gabriel realized with a start that this must be family. He lowered his rifle and approached cautiously. The other men watched him with wary eyes, clearly ready to defend their companion if necessary. But the older man said something to them in Apache, and they relaxed slightly. Halona turned to Gabriel, her face streaked with tears. "Gabriel, this is my uncle, my mother's brother. I thought he was dead. I thought all my family dead." The older man looked at Gabriel with sharp, assessing eyes. He said something in Apache and Halona translated. "He asks if you are the one who helped me, if you are my husband." "I am," Gabriel said, looking the man directly in the eye. "I found Halona in the desert and brought her to my home. We married last fall. She is carrying my child." Halona translated, and the older man nodded slowly. He spoke again, and this time his words were longer, more complex. Halona listened intently, occasionally asking questions. Finally, she turned to Gabriel. "He says his name is Nalnish. He was away from the village when the bandits came, hunting with others, when they returned and found." She swallowed hard. "When they found what had happened, they tracked the bandits and brought them to justice. Then they looked for survivors. They found signs that I had escaped into the desert but lost my trail. They thought I had died. But they heard stories of a white rancher with an Apache wife and came to see if it could be me." Gabriel felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had not even realized he was carrying. Halona had family, people who loved her and had mourned her loss. She was not alone in the world. "They are welcome here," Gabriel said to Halona. "Tell them they are welcome to stay to visit whenever they want. This is your family, and that makes them my family too." Halona's eyes filled with tears again as she translated. Nalnish listened, then spoke directly to Gabriel in halting but understandable English. You keep my sister's daughter safe. You give her honor of your name. For this, you have my thanks and my respect." He held out his hand and Gabriel shook it firmly. It was a gesture that bridged two worlds, two cultures. And in that moment, Gabriel felt a connection not just to this man but to Halona's entire heritage. The Apache men stayed for 3 days, camping near the house. During that time, Nalnish and the others got to know Gabriel, assessing him with the careful eye of men who had seen too much of the world's cruelty to trust easily. But Gabriel's obvious love for Halona and his treatment of her as an equal partner won them over. On the 3rd day before they left, Nalnish gave Gabriel a knife with a beautifully carved handle. "This belonged to Halona's father," he said. "He would want his daughter's husband to have it, to protect his family." Gabriel accepted the gift with a solemn nod, understanding the honor being bestowed upon him. "I will protect them with my life," he promised. After the Apache men left, Halona was quiet for a long time. Gabriel worried that seeing her uncle had brought back painful memories, had reopened wounds that had been starting to heal. But when he asked her about it, she shook her head. "I am not sad," she said. "I am happy. For so long I thought I had lost everything from my old life. But now I know some survived. I know I still have family beyond just you. And I know that our child will have more than just us. Will have connection to my people." Gabriel pulled her close, resting his hand on her swollen belly. "Our child is going to be so loved," he said. "By us, by your uncle and his people, by the friends we are making here. This baby is going to know beyond any doubt that it belongs." Halona smiled and kissed him softly. "You give me everything," she said. "Home, love, family. I never thought I would be so happy after what happened. But you show me that life can be good again, that there is still joy to be found." "You gave me the same thing," Gabriel replied. "I was just going through the motions before you came. Now I have a reason to get up every morning beyond just surviving. You made me want to live again, really live." In October of 1873, after a long and difficult labor that left Gabriel pacing outside like a caged animal while Mrs. Fletcher and another woman from town attended to Halona, their son was born. Gabriel heard the baby's first cry and nearly broke down the door in his haste to get inside. Halona lay exhausted on the bed, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, but she was smiling. Mrs. Fletcher placed a small bundle in Gabriel's arms, and he looked down at the tiny face of his son with wonder. The baby had Halona's dark hair and golden skin, but Gabriel could see his own features in the shape of the child's face. This perfect blend of both of them, this miracle they had created together, was the most beautiful thing Gabriel had ever seen. "He is perfect," Gabriel breathed, carrying the baby over to Halona so she could see. "Absolutely perfect." Halona reached up to touch her son's tiny hand, and the baby's fingers immediately wrapped around hers. "What should we name him?" she asked. They had discussed names for months, trying to find something that would honor both of their heritages. Now, looking at his son, Gabriel knew exactly what felt right. "Gray," he said. "Gray Thomas Strand. Gray for the dawn sky when he was born, Thomas after my father." Halona smiled and nodded. "Gray," she repeated, testing the name, "is good name, strong name." Mrs. Fletcher stayed for a few days to help out, and Gabriel was surprised and touched by her kindness. She taught him how to change the baby's cloths, how to hold him properly, all the little things that new parents need to know. She also brought food and supplies, refusing to accept payment. "You two remind me that there is still good in the world," she said simply when Gabriel tried to thank her. "That love can bridge any divide. I am honored to help." The first few months with baby Gray were exhausting but joyful. Gabriel had never known he could function on so little sleep. but somehow he managed. He would wake in the night to the sound of Gray crying and find Halona already up, rocking the baby and singing soft songs in Apache. He would come stand beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and they would marvel together at this new life they had created. As Gray grew, he proved to be a healthy, happy baby with a curious nature and his mother's bright eyes. Gabriel loved watching Halona with their son, seeing the tender way she cared for him, the songs she sang, the stories she told him in both English and Apache, even though he was too young to understand. Nalnish visited several times that first year, bringing gifts and staying for weeks at a time. He taught Gabriel more about Apache ways and customs, and Gabriel in turn shared his knowledge of ranching and the white man's world. They formed an unlikely friendship, these two men from different worlds brought together by their love for Halona. During one visit, when Gray was about 6 months old, Nalnish performed a traditional blessing ceremony for the baby. He painted symbols on Gray's forehead with clay and spoke words in Apache that Halona translated quietly for Gabriel. "He is asking the spirits to watch over Gray, to make him strong and wise, to help him walk in both worlds with honor and courage," she whispered. Gabriel felt his throat tighten with emotion. This blending of traditions, this honoring of both cultures, was exactly what he wanted for his son. Gray would know where he came from, would understand and appreciate both sides of his heritage. As the years passed, the Strand family flourished. Gabriel's ranch grew more successful as he gained a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. More people in town began to accept Halona, won over by her kindness and skill with healing herbs when they or their children fell ill. She became known as someone who could help with fevers and injuries, and even some of those who had been hostile toward her began to grudgingly respect her. Gray grew into a bright, energetic child who loved helping his father with the ranch work and learning from his mother about plants and animals. He spoke both English and Apache fluently, moving between the two languages with ease. Gabriel and Halona had 2 more children in the years that followed. A daughter they named Hope Minerva when Gray was 3, and another son they named Isaac when Hope was 2. The ranch house had to be expanded several times to accommodate their growing family. Gabriel built new rooms with his own hands, and Halona made the house into a warm, welcoming home filled with laughter and love. They hung Halona's traditional Apache crafts on the walls alongside Gabriel's family pictures, a visual representation of how their two cultures had blended into something new and beautiful. There were still challenges, of course. Gray came home crying one day when he was 7, saying that some boys in town had called him names and said he did not belong anywhere. Gabriel wanted to ride into town and have words with the boy's parents, but Halona stopped him. Instead, they sat Gray down and talked to him about who he was and where he came from. They told him about both of their families, about the strength and courage it took to build bridges between different peoples. They told him that being different was not a weakness but a gift, that he had the opportunity to understand things that others could not. "You are Apache," Halona told him firmly. "And you are white. You are both, and that makes you special. Those boys, they are afraid because they do not understand. But you will grow up to be a man who can help others understand, who can bring people together instead of pushing them apart." Gray listened intently, his young face serious. "Like how you and Papa brought your people together?" he asked. "Exactly like that," Gabriel said, pulling his son close. "Your mother and I, we show people that love is stronger than fear, and you will too when you are grown." As the children grew older, Gabriel and Halona made sure to teach them about both of their heritages. They celebrated both white and Apache traditions, told stories from both cultures, taught the children skills and knowledge from both worlds. It was not always easy, especially when they faced prejudice from both sides, but they persevered. Nalnish remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting regularly and teaching the children Apache ways. He was particularly close to Gray, teaching him how to track animals, how to move silently through the brush, how to read the signs of the land. Gabriel was grateful for this connection, knowing it kept Halona's heritage alive in their children. When Gray was 10, Hope 7, and Isaac 5, Gabriel decided it was time to make a trip that he had been thinking about for years. He wanted to take the family back to Missouri to visit the graves of his parents and show the children where he came from. It was a long journey and not without risks, but he felt it was important. They traveled by train for part of the journey, and the children were fascinated by this mode of transportation. Halona was more wary, uncomfortable with being enclosed in the train car with so many strangers staring at them. Gabriel stayed close to her, his presence a steady comfort, and gradually, she relaxed. Missouri was green and lush compared to the dry landscape of California, and the children were amazed by the differences. Gabriel showed them the farm where he had grown up, now owned by someone else, and took them to the small cemetery where his parents were buried. "This is your grandfather Gabriel and your grandmother Martha," he told the children, gesturing to the simple headstones. "They were good people who worked hard and loved each other very much. I wish they could have met you all, they would have been so proud." Hope slipped her small hand into his. "Do you think they can see us?" she asked in her sweet, high voice. "I think they can," Gabriel said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I think they are happy that I found your mother and that we have you three." On the journey back to California, they stopped in several towns along the way, and Gabriel began to notice something. While there was still prejudice and ugly stares, there were also people who seemed intrigued by their family, who asked respectful questions about Halona's heritage and culture. The world was changing, slowly but surely, and their family was part of that change. By the time Gray turned 16 in 1889, he had grown into a fine young man, tall and strong with his mother's wisdom and his father's determination. He was skilled with horses and cattle, could track as well as any Apache warrior, and had a way of talking to people that could bridge divides and ease tensions. Gabriel looked at his son with immense pride, knowing that he and Halona had raised him well. Hope, at 13, was becoming a beautiful young woman with a gift for healing that surpassed even her mother's. People came from miles around seeking her help with illnesses and injuries, and she never turned anyone away. Isaac, at 11, was the most outgoing of the three children, always laughing and making friends wherever he went. He had a gift for languages and could speak English, Apache, Spanish, and was learning French from a trader who passed through regularly. Gabriel and Halona watched their children grow with hearts full of love and pride. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on the porch they had built onto the house, watching the sun set over the land they had built together, and reflect on how far they had come. "Do you ever think about that day I found you?" Gabriel asked one evening, his arm around Halona's shoulders. "How different our lives would be if I had ridden a different path that day." Halona leaned into him, comfortable and secure in his embrace. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "I think about how scared I was, how alone I felt, and then I think about how you gave me everything. Not just shelter and safety, but love, a family, a future I never thought I would have. You gave me the same," Gabriel said, kissing the top of her head. "Before you, I was just existing, just going through the motions. You made me feel alive again. You gave my life meaning and purpose." "We were meant to find each other," Halona said softly. The spirits brought us together, or fate, or God, or just dumb luck, Gabriel replied with a smile. Does not really matter what we call it. What matters is that we found each other and we built something beautiful together. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as their children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Gray was teaching Isaac how to throw a lasso while Hope sat nearby, weaving a basket in the Apache style her mother had taught her. They are going to do great things, Halona said, watching them with a mother's pride. Gray will help bring people together. I can see it in him. Hope will heal both bodies and hearts. And Isaac, he will tell our story, will make sure people understand. You think so? Gabriel asked. I know so, Halona replied firmly. We show them how to love without fear, how to be strong without being cruel, how to honor both their heritages. They will carry that forward and teach their children the same. What we started, they will continue. Gabriel felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. He was 43 years old now, no longer the young cowboy who had stumbled upon a frightened girl in the desert. He had gray threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he had never been happier, never been more satisfied with his life. Halona was 39 now, still beautiful in Gabriel's eyes, her face showing the marks of the life they had lived together, but losing none of its grace. She had survived horrors that would have broken lesser people, had built a new life from the ashes of the old, and had raised 3 incredible children. She was, Gabriel thought, the strongest person he had ever known. In 1891, when Gray was 18 and talking about his plans to start his own ranch nearby, tragedy struck in the form of a drought that gripped California. The land dried up, water sources dwindled, and Gabriel's cattle suffered. Many ranchers in the area lost everything, but Gabriel managed to keep most of his herd alive, thanks to Halona's knowledge of where to find water and which plants the cattle could eat when grass was scarce. It was a difficult time, testing the resilience of their family, but they got through it together. Gray postponed his plans for his own ranch and stayed to help. Hope used her healing skills to help when people got sick from contaminated water. Isaac, despite being only 13, worked as hard as any adult. And through it all, Gabriel and Halona stood strong, their love for each other and their family carrying them through. When the rains finally came in the spring of 1892, there was celebration throughout the region. Gabriel stood in the rain with Halona, both of them laughing and crying at the same time, grateful to have survived another challenge. We can get through anything, Gabriel said, holding her close despite being soaked to the skin. As long as we have each other, we can face anything. Together, Halona agreed, kissing him with the passion and love that had never dimmed in all their years together. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. Gray did eventually start his own ranch, marrying a kind young woman named Alina, who accepted him completely and loved hearing Halona's stories. Hope became the most sought-after healer in the region, and she married a doctor who had come west from Boston, drawn to her skill and her compassionate heart. Isaac, true to his gift with languages and people, became a translator and mediator, working to ease tensions between different communities. Gabriel and Halona became grandparents, watching with joy as their children raised families of their own. They passed on their stories and their wisdom to a new generation, teaching their grandchildren the same lessons they had taught their children. As Gabriel entered his 60s, he began to slow down, his body showing the wear of decades of hard work. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Halona never wavered. If anything, it grew deeper with each passing year, enriched by shared experiences and memories. One evening in the spring of 1905, Gabriel and Halona sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. They were both in their 60s now, their children grown and raising families of their own, their grandchildren playing in the yard before them. The ranch had been passed primarily to Gray, though all three children shared in its ownership and profits. "You have any regrets?" Halona asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "About your life, about marrying me, about any of it?" Gabriel turned to look at her in surprise. "Regrets?" He repeated. "Halona, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. These years with you, raising our children, building this life together, they have been the happiest of my life. How could I possibly regret any of it? We faced so much hardship," Halona said. "So much judgment and cruelty from others. I sometimes wonder if your life would have been easier if you had married a white woman, someone accepted by your community." Gabriel took her hands in his, looking into her eyes with all the love he felt. "Easier, maybe," he acknowledged, "but not better. Not fuller. Not filled with as much love and joy. You challenged me, made me grow, made me see the world differently. Our children are proof that love can bridge any divide, and our grandchildren will carry that message forward. I would not change a single thing, Halona, not one single thing." Tears slipped down Halona's weathered cheeks, and Gabriel gently brushed them away. "I love you," she said. "Have loved you since those early days when you showed me kindness when I had nothing. Will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Gabriel replied. "From the moment I saw you in that desert, something in me recognized you. My heart knew you before my mind did, and I have loved you more with each passing day." They kissed, a soft, tender kiss that spoke of decades of love and partnership and shared life. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through their tears. That night, as they lay in bed together, Halona's head resting on Gabriel's shoulder as it had for over 30 years, Gabriel thought about the incredible journey they had been on together. From that day in the desert to this moment, with a lifetime of memories between them, it had all been worth it. Every challenge, every hardship, every moment of joy and sorrow, all of it had led to this perfect contentment. Gabriel lived to the age of 73, passing peacefully in his sleep in the summer of 1913 with Halona at his side, and his children and grandchildren gathered around. His last words were to tell Halona that he loved her, and that finding her that day in the desert had been the best thing that ever happened to him. Halona mourned him deeply, but also celebrated the life they had built together. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by her loving family, before she too passed on to join Gabriel. She was buried beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a sky that stretched endlessly in all directions. At their funeral, Gray stood before the assembled crowd, a mix of white settlers, Apache people, Mexican families, and others who had been touched by Gabriel and Halona's example. He spoke of his parents' love, of how they had shown everyone that differences could be celebrated rather than feared, that love could bridge any divide. "My father once told me that finding my mother was like finding the missing piece of himself," Gray said, his voice strong despite his grief. "And my mother said the same about him. They were two people from different worlds who came together and built something beautiful. They faced prejudice and hardship, but they never let it break them. Their love was stronger than hate, stronger than fear, stronger than anything the world could throw at them." He paused, looking out at the faces before him, seeing the impact his parents had made. "They taught us that we are all just people, all deserving of love and respect and dignity. They showed us that our differences make us stronger, not weaker, and they proved that love, real love, can change the world." The legacy of Gabriel and Halona Strand lived on through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to thrive, becoming known as a place where all were welcome regardless of their background. The story of the cowboy who found an Apache girl wandering alone and gave her shelter, only to find his soulmate, was passed down through generations. A reminder that love could bloom in the most unexpected places and circumstances. Hope eventually wrote down the story, preserving it for future generations. She included all the details her parents had shared with her over the years, all the challenges they had faced and overcome, all the love and joy they had found together. The book became a treasured family heirloom, read to each new generation as a reminder of where they came from and what they stood for. The hill where Gabriel and Halona were buried became a place of pilgrimage for their descendants and for others who heard their story and were inspired by it. People would come to stand at their graves and reflect on the power of love, the importance of seeing beyond differences, the courage it takes to stand against prejudice and hatred. Years later, when Gray himself was an old man, he would bring his great-grandchildren to that hill and tell them the story of their ancestors. He would point to the vast land below, to the ranch that had grown from a small homestead into a thriving enterprise, and tell them that all of it started with one act of kindness, one moment when a cowboy saw a frightened girl and chose compassion over indifference. "Your great-grandfather saw someone in need and helped her," Gray would tell them. "He did not care that she was different, did not care what others might say. He just saw another human being who needed help. And from that one choice, from that one moment of compassion, came all of this. Came our entire family. Never underestimate the power of kindness, of love, of choosing to see the humanity in everyone you meet." The children would listen with wide eyes, imagining that day in 1872 when Gabriel had spotted Halona stumbling through the desert. They would picture their great-grandmother as a young woman, frightened and alone, and their great-grandfather as a young cowboy who made a choice that would change both their lives forever. And they would carry that story with them, along with the lessons it contained. They would tell it to their children, and their children would tell it to theirs, ensuring that the legacy of Gabriel and Halona Strand lived on, a testament to the power of love to transcend any barrier, to bridge any divide, to create something beautiful from the most unlikely of beginnings. The ranch itself stood as a monument to what they had built. The original small house had been preserved even as additions were made, kept as it had been in Gabriel and Halona's time. Visitors could still see the bed where their children had been born, the table where they had shared countless meals, the porch where they had sat together watching sunsets and talking about their dreams. In the barn, hanging in a place of honor, was the knife that Nalnish had given to Gabriel, along with other artifacts from both cultures that represented the blending of two worlds. There were Gabriel's cowboy gear and Halona's traditional Apache crafts, side by side, equal and valued. The land itself showed the influence of both Gabriel and Halona. The cattle ranching techniques Gabriel had used were combined with Halona's knowledge of the land and its plants. The result was a ranch that worked in harmony with nature rather than against it, sustainable and productive even during difficult times. As the 20th century progressed and the world changed, the story of Gabriel and Halona remained relevant. Their example of love transcending cultural barriers, of people from different worlds building a life together despite opposition and prejudice, continued to inspire. In times when division seemed insurmountable, their story offered hope that understanding and love could prevail. The descendants of Gabriel and Halona spread across the country and eventually the world, but they all carried with them the story of their ancestors. They understood that they were the living proof of what their great-great-grandparents had believed in, that love could bridge any divide, that differences could be strengths, that courage and compassion could change the world. And so the legacy lived on, a love story that began with a chance encounter in the desert and grew into something that touched countless lives across generations. Gabriel Strand, the cowboy who gave shelter to a frightened Apache girl, and Halona, the woman who became his soulmate and partner in building an extraordinary life, had shown the world what was possible when love was stronger than fear, when compassion triumphed over prejudice, when two people from different worlds chose to build a bridge between them. Their love story was not just about them. It was about hope, about possibility, about the transformative power of seeing the humanity in every person we meet. It was about having the courage to stand against hatred and the wisdom to know that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. It was about building something lasting, something beautiful, something that would outlive them and continue to make the world better long after they were gone. And in the end, is that not what every great love story is truly about? Not just the love between two people, but the ripples that love creates, spreading outward and touching lives in ways we can never fully predict or comprehend. Gabriel and Halona's love did that. It changed their world, and through their descendants and the countless others inspired by their example, it continues to change the world still. Their story, which began on a dusty trail in the summer of 1872, became timeless, a reminder that the most profound connections can happen in the most unexpected ways, and that when we open our hearts to love, we open ourselves to possibilities we never imagined. Gabriel found Halona wandering alone, gave her shelter, and discovered his soulmate. And in doing so, they created a legacy of love that would endure forever, as eternal as the western sky under which they had built their life together.